According to the internet, the first thing you should do with a brand new motorcycle is put an exhaust on it. I'm here to combat that idea and tell you that the first thing you need to do is set up your motorcycle to fit you. One thing I do recommend if you're getting on a brand new motorcycle is to ride the bike as is. If you can ride it from the dealership back to your house or your garage, I highly suggest it, because in that time of riding, that should clue you in on the things that need adjusted on the motorcycle. Whether it be ergonomics, a simple change like lever position, handlebar angle, or clip-on angle, all those things can make a ride a lot more or less enjoyable, depending on the severity, of course. And this especially goes when changing styles of bikes. You're learning a different rider triangle, you're learning the controls, the locations, and their points of engagement. Secondly, after you learn the motorcycle as is, this is the best time to tweak the controls and the ergonomics of the machine to fit you. And at this point, you'll also increase your general safety on the motorcycle, and here's why. If you find yourself in a situation where a quick reaction is key to survival, is it faster to reach for a control that you know where it is, or is it faster to think of where that control is and then reach for it? That split second can make a world of difference given the situation. In the event you don't have the adjustability, with training and practice you can memorize and adjust to nearly anything. But as motorcyclists, we generally have the option to adjust the controls and ergonomics to match us, and that's where you should start with setting up your machine. To start this off, let's talk about ergonomics and the rider triangle. The rider triangle is made up of 3 points on the bike. That's where your feet are located, where your seat is located, and where your bars are located. For 4 basic examples of this, we'll first look at the cruiser, an ADV motorcycle, a super sport motorcycle, and a standard motorcycle, or UJM. And with each different rider triangle, the ergonomics of the machine will need set up slightly differently to fit your body. A good starting position that I use and that I recommend for other people is that you hold your arms out straight from your shoulder to your fingertips. And laying your hands on top of the grips, the levers should be just under your fingertips. And another thing to pay attention to while you're doing this check is whether your bars are in position with your body. This isn't as adjustable with clip-ons, it can be done with aftermarket clip-ons, but for now we'll look at handlebars. There is nothing saying that bars have to be 100% symmetrical on the bike, just as we as humans aren't 100% symmetrical. So if your relaxed position has your arms slightly off center of the bike, you can adjust the bars off center to match your body, which is going to make a longer ride more comfortable. Now with your hands on top of the grips, look at where the levers are. If the levers are just under your fingertips, that's a good starting point. Now put your hand on the grips in a relaxed fashion and see if reaching for the levers causes you to have to roll your wrist up or down to reach for the lever. Ideally, you'll have minimal wrist movement here, as you don't want to whiskey throttle yourself in order to reach the brakes, but you also don't want to have to shut the throttle completely off to reach over and grab the brake lever. It should be a simple motion to reach over and squeeze your brake lever with 2 fingers. If you find yourself having to move your wrist up or down, roll onto the throttle or off of the throttle in order to reach your levers properly, make small adjustments until this is a comfortable action. Adjust your levers so that the engagement point of your clutch lever and the engagement point of your brake lever, your shift lever, and your brake pedal are all where you want them for a quick, easy reaction. And you may also want to take some rides and slowly dial your ergonomics of your motorcycle in to fit whatever aches and pains you might feel after a long ride. If you start feeling a little bit of pain in your wrist, especially in a super sport body position, you may want to change the position of your pegs to your seat, either by changing the seat, changing out rear sets, and changing the peg height, or also change out clip-ons so that you get your hand position a little bit higher. Also, if on a longer ride you feel lower back pain, you may want to raise your hand position and get your torso more straight up and down. Make the position a little bit more enjoyable for longer rides. Once you have those adjusted and are comfortable on your motorcycle, don't stop there. If your bike is equipped with adjustable suspension, even if it's just a preload adjustment, set rider sag. Static sag is okay, but rider sag is going to ensure your suspension is inside of its proper working range while you're on the road. Every type of bike and manufacturer has their own settings, but for the purpose of this video, we're going to speak in generalities, and in general, you're going to go by the 70% rule or the 30% rule. And that is to say that the rider sag which is the weight of the rider in gear sitting on the motorcycle, has you using 30% of the suspension's travel. For this example, I'm adjusting the preload and setting the rider sag on my MT-09. And for this, I want to fall somewhere in the range of 35 to 40 millimeters, or for us standard folks, 1¼ inches to 1½ inches. Definitely check with your bike or suspension manufacturer to be certain what numbers you should be aiming for. And to dial this in, we need to be measuring from fixed points on the motorcycle. So for example, on the rear of the bike, you may want to measure from your rear axle bolt up to, say, your turn signal or a body line on your fairing. You get a length from these 2 points with the suspension completely extended, and then get another length with the weight of the rider on the machine. On the front suspension on the forks of the motorcycle, this is generally easier because you can unload the forks or completely take the weight off of the front wheel and get a length of the exposed portion of the fork. If you have right side up forks, you can measure from your lower triple tree clamp down to the outer fork tube. And then again, get this measurement with the weight of the rider on the motorcycle in riding position. And if that's all the adjustment your suspension has, you are free to go for a ride and see how it does. If you feel your suspension bottom out going through heavy dips or going over hard bumps, crank that preload up just a little bit. If going over those same bumps you feel your suspension top out, which on front forks can sometimes be accompanied by a thunking noise, you may try backing your preload off just a little bit and take that same route again at the same speed. And from this point on, we're going to be talking about valving adjustments. So if your suspension doesn't have valving adjustments, unfortunately this is where we leave you. If you do have valving adjustments, let's get into it so you can understand what does what and how it's going to keep you from rattling your bones going through bumps. So valving adjustments are usually marked as S and H for soft and hard. To think of this in an easier way, we'll describe them as faster and slower. Soft is fast and hard is slow. And by turning the adjuster in, you're essentially blocking off more of the hole that the fork oil is passing through, which makes the suspension travel slower to its destination height, which is controlled by your rider sag set previously. And the opposite is true when moving the adjuster out, you're opening up the hole, which is going to make the suspension travel faster to its destination height. This is why we start with rider sag. We need the tension of the spring set to where it will be operating with the rider on it to get a more accurate baseline for valving. Your compression side, sometimes denoted by just a C or COMP, going to control how quickly the compression absorbs bumps on the road. I like to start with the compression in the middle of its adjustment range, or consult the manufacturer for a baseline setting. Now rebound adjustment, sometimes shown as R, often shown as TEN for tension, is how fast the suspension can return from compression after hitting a bump in the road. We'll start here with the rear of the bike. If you do have a front wheel chock, I suggest putting the front wheel in the wheel chock to hold the bike steady, or if you have a helper to hold the front of the bike up, that way you have free access to the rear of the machine. That'll make this a whole lot easier. So basically what you're going to do here is perform CPR on the tail. You're going to surge down quickly with both hands and immediately lift your hands off of the motorcycle and watch the return rate of the rear of the bike. If the rear of the bike returns to full height and bounces in any way, you should turn your rebound adjustment in or turn it toward hard or slow. On the front of the motorcycle, you will hold it by the grips, squeeze on the front brake. You're going to move the front suspension in line with the forks, if that makes any sense. You're going to lift and unload the suspension as much as you can, surge down on the front suspension in line with the forks, and then let your arms go neutral. What you want here is for the front suspension of the motorcycle to reach its peak and then settle back down roughly 1/2 inch. If you get more than one bounce out of the front, adjust your rebound adjuster in or toward the hard side or slow side. So an ideal setup will have your fork returning to full height and then settling about 1/2 inch, and the rear of the motorcycle should return to full height as quickly as possible without bounce. Now remember, this is a starting point. You may want to adjust this with the rider on the motorcycle going down the road. If you have a second person to watch your suspension in action and judge whether or not it is bouncing, or if you can even set up your phone to record a video of your motorcycle going over bumps, you can get a clue of if you need to slow down or speed up your suspension. Now, if you've reached a position where your rebound is not able to compensate enough to slow the suspension down, you may want to turn the screw in or toward the hard side on your compression valving. This is going to slow down the rate at which the suspension compresses, therefore also not having as much spring tension on the rebound cycle of the suspension. And that's a basic by-the-books way of how to get started on your valving. Now let's talk about how to adjust it to fit you. Compression and rebound will likely need adjusted slightly per rider and the type of riding you do. If you commute or you ride the highway mostly, you'll be just fine with the baseline adjustments we just went over. Understanding how to adjust each side of the valving is key to dialing in your most comfortable or best performing ride. Like we talked about before, compression valving is going to control how fast the suspension is able to soak up rough surfaces. Too slow and you'll feel more of the road, and you'll also put more load into your tires. Too fast and you may bottom out your suspension, which leads to the potential for serious danger on the road. For road use, a slightly faster compression is going to ride better, whereas a slower compression will give you more feedback for spirited riding in the twisties or for track riding. Rebound can be tweaked to the ride as well. Too fast of a rebound and you may feel like the bike is floating or bouncing, sometimes referred to as pogoing under load like from braking or cornering. But also keep an eye on your tires. To the opposite side, too slow of a rebound will keep the suspension from returning to its working position, which can end up in packing or stacking of the suspension. This is when the suspension compresses more and more with each bump. Imagine hitting a badly washboarded section of road, and with each rib you go over, the suspension gets tighter and tighter. This again leads to your tires taking more of the load from the road surface, and handling will suffer. The biggest tip I can offer here is to make small adjustments. One click at a time, or a quarter turn at a time in some cases, until the ride is where you want it. I made a comment earlier about keeping an eye on your tires for rebound adjustment. There's a lot to be learned if you really want to dive into what your tires can tell you, not only with your suspension, but also about your riding style and your habits. To keep this short in reference to rebound adjustments, you can look at your tread grooves and sipes on your tires. I'm going to use some simple examples to explain two common deformations on the tire tread or grooves. If the leading edge of your tire is high, the suspension is too slow on rebound. The tire is loaded against the road surface in a bump, and the trailing edge of the groove is unloaded as it hits the road surface, causing accelerated wear on the trailing edge. Or the opposite can be true, where the trailing edge is high and the suspension is too fast on rebound. In this case, the suspension rebounds fast enough that the tire unloads from the road surface, causing the leading edge of the groove to miss the road surface and cause more tire wear behind it. There's a lot more that goes into the explanation of how your suspension affects tire wear patterns, but it's beyond the scope of this video since we're looking at initial suspension setup more than tire wear adjustments. Now, if for some reason you're unable to dial in the suspension for the initial rider sag or the rebound settings, you may want to look into changing your springs and possibly your fork and shock oil to compensate. A lot of these bikes are sprung for riders in the 150 to 180 pound range, and for us more American-sized riders, we can often get within a decent operating range, but if you aren't able to, it's time to think about upgrades. And as a general disclaimer, if you're not comfortable wrenching on your own machine, please take it to someone who knows what they are doing. It's better safe than sorry, and in the long run, you're better off spending a little bit of coin rather than risking your neck not knowing what you're doing. With all that, ride safe, stay sane, and we'll catch you in the next one.